Welcome to Stereo 3D Productions and this VorpX setup guide for What Remains of Edith Finch, a short game about a family that likely have serious issues with neglect, foul play, and possibly even murder. You're watching a VorpX tutorial series that is founded on the VorpX Universal Guide video. If you haven't watched that yet, there will be a link to the Universal Guide at the top of the description of this video. Please consider watching that first before any game-specific tutorial. The Universal Guide covers all the basic elements with VorpX. Also, if you see the tag "outdated" in the title of this video, this means that the tutorial has been completely redone into a newer version. If you see the tag "updated", it means we've got additional information in a new video regarding this game. If you see either tag, just look for a link to the update video or the replacement tutorial at the top of the description. The videos in this series all contain a table of contents in the description with timecodes. Feel free to use those to skip to any section of the video. If you're really in a hurry, I'll also throw in a PDF document with the instructions we'll be using to make this video. You'll find a link to this document in the description, so you don't even have to watch this presentation unless you want a few visual helpers. The capability to run What Remains of Edith Finch in virtual reality with VorpX has been a long time coming. Such a thing was first requested to me by Nathy, a well-known YouTube creator who wanted to share the game with the world through a VR headset. However, at the time it was difficult, near damn impossible to run Unreal Engine 4 games with VorpX. Through the following year, a lot of updates were pushed to VorpX, notably a lot of profiles that worked with specific Unreal Engine 4 games. Finally, one of those updates came with a profile for What Remains of Edith Finch. It took me some time to finally delve in, because this profile only allowed for an immersive screen and/or cinema mode playthrough. Immersive screen and cinema mode is more like playing the game on an enormous screen inside your virtual space rather than being fully immersed into the game world, and while it's great, full VR is simply much more immersive. And I knew it would take quite a lot of work to get the game working, as everyone probably wanted to see it in full VR mode. After messing about with Cheat Engine, discovering the most important part, how to force the field of view we want with this game, and after several playtests through large parts of the game, eventually an entire playthrough in one sitting, I can safely say we've found the best possible setup for this little short but sweet gem. I knew I'd like this title, and the entire story had actually been spoiled to me by a lengthy review. And because of this, the game's second half hit me much harder than I ever expected it would. Some of those stories were deeply troubling, and scenes managed to have a strong effect on me, much more than I bargained for. The setup guide will provide you with two flavors for this game. The original immersive screen or cinema mode version VorpX offers out of the box, and the full VR setup, which will give you complete immersion. Both setups will have excellent geometry 3D, the only way to play VR, and this should give you enough options to thoroughly enjoy this game with your virtual reality headset. Let's pretend you've just installed the game and this is your very first time running it. The first step to take when planning to run a game with VorpX is to run the title at least once in 2D on your desktop without VR, so it can install prerequisites and create its configuration files. While you've got the game running, take this opportunity to go in the graphics settings and adjust a few things. First, you'll want to keep the game at its default full screen mode, which means you'll be keeping it at your desktop's resolution. The game will crash if you try to hook it with VorpX in windowed mode, so we'll have no choice but to pick a 16:9 resolution, likely 1920 by 1080. Make sure VSync is set to off, as this option might cause intense judder in VR. Start with resolution quality on Ultra. If you find you're getting bad performance later, you can lower this to high, but I've found the game looks its sharpest on Ultra, enough so that I don't mind losing a few frames. Turn this god-awful anti-aliasing off by putting the setting to low. Most DirectX 11 games don't have any real means of anti-aliasing, and you'll just end up with filters that blur the game image to the point where it looks like there's Vaseline on your screen. Set post-processing to low. It'll give you a far better frame rate, and the visual gain isn't really worth it. Shadows should be on low, given we're later going to disable most of them as they don't render correctly in VR. Texture quality can stay on ultra since most video cards nowadays have enough memory to deal with it. I set draw distance to medium. It kept the frame rate nice while keeping pop-in at a minimum. Effects didn't seem to have much performance impact. Medium appears to give the best balance. Once you've gone through your game graphics settings, go ahead and quit out. It's time to go edit a couple of configuration files. I'll be putting the path you need to navigate to both on your screen and in the description of this video. First, navigate to the file gameusersettings.ini. You'll want to go under the script FinchGame.FinchGame user settings category and look for full screen mode. If you find it, make sure it's followed by =1. If it's set to anything else, change it to =1. Now, if you don't find this value, add it yourself in the category and set its value to =1. See, if the game loads with any other value than what I'm showing here, it will crash when VorpX tries to hook into it. If you're seeing a fatal error later when trying to hook with VorpX, it means you've got this step wrong. Next, navigate to the engine.ini file. This game has chromatic aberration, and this is an effect we really don't want in VR unless we wanted to simulate being dangerously drunk, uncomfortably high, or even just sick. Add the following entries to the engine.ini file, which should be empty before you do this. I'll post this text in the description so you can easily copy-paste it. Next, there's the VorpX profile. The profile that VorpX uses for this game will only work with the Steam edition. If you're using the GOG or Epic Games version of the game, you'll need to make a copy of this profile and bind it to the correct exe file. First, open the VorpX configuration tool and go in Local Profiles. Find the What Remains of Edith Finch profile and click on it. Next, click the Create a New Profile based on this one button. In the New User Profile window, name the profile something you'll remember. For example, I just add GOG/epic between brackets at the end of mine. Check the Keep Special Shader Definitions if available option and finally hit OK. Now your new profile should be selected in the VorpX configuration window. Click the Add button on the top right and locate the file FinchGame-Win64-shipping.exe. I'll put the path structure on the screen now to help you find it. It'll also be in the description. Once you've added the game's file, you're good to go. Hit Apply and Close. Keep in mind you don't have to create a copy of the profile like this if you're using the Steam edition of the game. That one will work fine with the profile already built into VorpX. Okay everyone, let's make a short stop here. You can at this point go ahead and play the game in its default immersive screen mode. Keep in mind there's a few things I like to change when playing this way. With the game running in VorpX, go ahead and press the Delete key to open the VorpX HUD. We can make things look a little bit better. First off, the stock VorpX profile for the game will have you using the playstyle Immersive Screen Mode. You can change this under Main Settings. Personally, I found that the immersive screen's curvature messed up the 3D depth of objects in the edges of your view. The best results I observed were by using the Cinema mode. While this mode provides less of a wraparound view, the integrity of the game's 3D depth will be preserved much better, and you might just find the visuals a lot more convincing that way. The other setting I like to tweak for this mode, also under Main Settings, is the 3D Strength/Scale, which I lower to 0.75. Reducing it to 0.75 makes the world appear a lot more realistic. Now, if you find this mode is a little too disconnected from the game and want to see the title in its full wraparound field of view glory, keep on watching. We're about to go over the true VR configuration. Before you get started with the VorpX configuration itself, you'll need a third-party tool called Cheat Engine in order to be able to force this game's field of view to the desired value for VR. Download yourselves a copy of Cheat Engine, there's going to be a link to it in the description, and extract the app somewhere you'll remember. Go ahead and install that app. Next, you'll need what we call the cheat table. This file will tell Cheat Engine where the game's field of view value is. There are two cheat tables, one for the Steam version of the game and another one for the GOG or Epic Games version of the game. Make sure you download the one corresponding to the version you're running. There will be a link in the description for each version. Extract this file somewhere you'll remember, as we're going to need to open it shortly. There's a modified exe file for the GOG or Epic Games version of the game. This exe will make absolutely sure that our corresponding cheat table works correctly. Download this replacement exe, there's going to be a link in the description, and next, to play it safe, make a backup of your game's original exe file, and go ahead and drop the replacement exe at the same place you found the original one. Keep in mind you can skip this step completely if you're using the Steam version of the game. Before you fire up What Remains of Edith Finch, open your corresponding cheat table, either the one for the Steam edition or the one for the GOG or Epic Games edition. Just double-click on the file. This will automatically launch Cheat Engine. Now, it's finally time to launch What Remains of Edith Finch. Start up your VR runtimes, either SteamVR or Oculus Home, and then launch VorpX. If you're running off Steam, start the game normally with the launch button. If you're using the GOG or Epic Games edition, manually run the FinchGame 164 shipping.exe file we just replaced earlier. In all cases, the game should fire up and VorpX should hook up with it, at which point you'll see it display in your headset. Now, I know you're eager to enjoy some quality VR at this point, but don't put the headset on just yet. Use Alt-Tab to switch from the game's window to Cheat Engine's main window. From Cheat Engine, click File, then click Open Process. In this dialog, under the Applications tab, find What Remains of Edith Finch and click on it, and then click the Open button. Cheat Engine will ask, keep the current address list code list. Click Yes. Finally, we have to enter the field of view value. This will differ between the Steam edition and the GOG or Epic Games edition. The Steam version cheat table has 4 entries. One of them should be labeled v.1.1_FOV. Double-click on this entry's value and enter 0.0123. The GOG or Epic Games cheat table has just one entry labeled FOV. Double-click on its value and enter 0.0123. The field of view value should immediately take effect. It's now time to put your headset on. You can go right ahead and press the Delete key to open the VorpX settings and put in everything we need for a true VR experience. First, under Main Settings, set Playstyle to Full VR. Next, make sure 3D Reconstruction is on Geometry, and set 3D Strength/Scale to 0.55. Yes, I know this is lower than usual, but after multiple tests, I found this to be the closest possible value, reproducing a lifelike scale for everything in the game. Next, change head tracking sensitivity to 0.95. Keep in mind, this head tracking sensitivity will only work with the game's default mouse sensitivity setting. If you've ever changed the mouse sensitivity of the game, you'll need to either put it back to the default by having the slider in the middle, or you can adjust the head tracking sensitivity yourself. Refer to the Manual VR section in the VorpX Universal Guide, which shows the easiest way to adjust this to near perfection. Next, go to Image Settings. Set Crystal Image to off and make sure G3D Shadow Treatment is set to turn off, and then reduce image zoom to 0.75. 0.75 is lower than I'll usually go. Now, since we're stuck at a 16:9 aspect ratio with this game, the way the image has to be scaled for VR worsens the already intense aliasing this game produces. Since the anti-aliasing methods used by the game are useless at fighting this off, we're forced to squeeze as many pixels of the game as possible in our view in order to improve the sharpness of edges in the image. This is why we're putting image zoom this low. Now, you may notice a tiny slither of the image's edges at the top and bottom of your view. They're not prominent, but they're there. To counter this, we'll be setting the background option to ambiance. This should make sure those edges are pretty much unnoticeable. As a final touch, go into Display Settings and set Direct Mode Fluid Sync to off and set Tracking Prediction to off as well. Those two settings essentially produce the same problem with this game. You'll get a very erratic head tracking if you leave them on. Having them off will ensure you never have your head movements send the game's camera spinning around like a cat that's high on Mountain Dew. That's it for the VorpX settings. Hit the OK and Save button to keep all those changes. You are now ready to enjoy What Remains of Edith Finch in pretty excellent virtual reality. While this is a really good VR adaptation for What Remains of Edith Finch, there are a few issues we should bring up, along with one problem that was very prominent during our testing. First, if you're starting the game from the beginning, you're going to see an annoying flickering shadow when the camera pans down at Edith's book. Don't be discouraged by this. I'm not sure why that one shadow shows up, because the G3D shadow treatment otherwise works beautifully. Beyond this point, you're basically not going to see that type of shadow anymore. As soon as you're on the forest trail to the Finch house, everything will look fine. Second, there's a minor issue that might make you think the field of view is configured wrong by parts. There's a slight position shift when the camera rotates in the game. You'll notice a back and forth sway when you look left and right or up and down. Don't worry, your field of view is in fact correct and the movement is slight enough to be able to ignore completely. You'll only notice it if you're standing very close to a wall or an object. Third, if you need to open the user interface at any point in the game, or you wish to view the entire storybook, you'll need to enable Edge Peek to do so. Enable Edge Peek by clicking your middle mouse button and clicking it again to go back to full VR. Next, keep in mind this game has a lot of forced camera motion. At the very beginning, for example, you're forced to look at the storybook. This doesn't last long. In fact, you're given full control as soon as you appear on the forest trail to the Finch house. You'll notice that when the floating text appears in some places, the camera will be forced to steer towards it. This is only momentary, and you're given full control back immediately after. Some short scenes will downright take over your camera movement, but again, this is never for too long. During Molly's scene, specifically the part where you're a monster, you won't have any head tracking at all. This is how the scene works by design, and it's short enough that it won't be a problem for most people. In fact, I was pretty impressed by that moment of the game despite that issue. Bottom line is, for most of your playthrough, you'll be in full control of your head's movement. Another issue is that the field of view will be exaggerated in at least 3 scenes in the game. Examples I can think of are Molly's scene when you're a cat, Calvin's entire scene, and Walter's scene when you're opening the cans. The scenes are short enough that it won't completely throw you off, but it is indeed a noticeable downside. This next one is less of an issue, but more of a recommendation. During Barbara's comic book scene, it's best that you enable Edge Peek for the entire thing. When the game first zooms into the comic book, enable Edge Peek by pressing your middle mouse button. Disable it once the game returns to the normal first-person view by pressing your middle mouse button again. Finally, and this is the most important issue because it's a real problem, the fish cutting part of Lewis's scene is completely broken with VorpX. For one, the field of view boost causes the minigame's camera to be shifted off position, and you won't see the main character you're supposed to move within it. For 2, the head tracking causes the mouse movement to grab the fish to be completely erratic. I spent longer than I should have fighting with this in my playthrough. It seems the way VorpX handles the mouse movement causes the game to send Lewis's hand flying from one end of the screen to the other. Expect to miss grabbing fish. Also, expect to send the ones you do manage to grab flying through the guillotine. And finally, you might just get to chop and toss a few the way the game intends you to. There's 2 solutions to this problem. The first is to exit the game when this scene begins, come back to it on the desktop, play through it, and when the game saves, close and come back in VR. This solution kind of sucks because you won't get to experience the end of Lewis's scene in VR, and the end of the scene is freaking awesome. The second solution to this problem is to stay in VR. Put the cheat engine FOV back to its default value of 0.0087, at which point you'll be able to see the minigame, then switch to edge peek for the entire fish cutting portion of the scene. The issue where the hand flies around will still be there, but you'll kind of be able to get through the whole minigame with a bit of patience. When the fish cutting scene ends and Lewis spawns in the employee locker room, just set your FOV back to 0.0123 in cheat engine, exit edge peek, and resume playing it normally. It's worth it. What follows absolutely blew me away. It was a big list, but now you can jump into the game fully aware of every single issue you'll run into. If these haven't turned you off from trying, I highly recommend playing What Remains of Edith Finch in virtual reality, despite this longer than usual list of possible problems. A footnote I should add here before we move on to the conclusion is the fact that even though this is a manual VR setup, this time I do not recommend using a pitch-locked mouse. Most games I play with VorpX support direct VR head tracking, but for those that don't, I normally use a mouse that doesn't respond on the vertical axis. In this case, however, I chose to use a normal mouse. This does introduce the problem where your in-game's vertical head orientation may not match your real-life vertical head orientation, but the game had so much forced camera motion that using a pitch-lock mouse would have been counterproductive given how many times I would have to readjust the orientation. This isn't too much of a problem since the game's pace is far from blistering, quite the opposite actually, and thus you'll always be able to casually, comfortably match your vertical orientation mid-play. You have to keep in mind what made me so curious about this title is the fact that I had previously seen Joseph Anderson's end-to-end review of this unique experience. Yes, the game's entire story had been spoiled to me beforehand. You'd expect I wouldn't want to play this thing after knowing so much prior to going into it, but instead, the spoilers simply made me want to play through everything myself. What Remains of Edith Finch started off to me as a beautiful game. This is another one of those titles I played straight to VR without experiencing any of it on the desktop before. My first run was in cinema mode, and already there, I was mind-boggled at how unique this whole experience was. By the time I had reached Molly's scene, I was simply left speechless. What really struck me from the beginning is how, despite having a majority of the story spoiled for me, I was still being shocked by the story progression. It felt like I didn't even expect things that I already knew. My second playthrough of the game was done in full VR. I started over from the beginning, and while I expected to want to rush all the parts I had already seen in my first run, I found myself unable to speed up my pace, noticing even more detail of this amazing game world, taking my time to absorb it all. By the game's halfway point, I had 2 things happening. First, I found myself unable to stop. A part of me was completely determined to finish the game in one single sitting. Secondly, the buildup of sadness in all the characters' stories was taking its toll on me. Right around Gregory's story, I started having this grim feeling in me. If it makes any sense, it was a satisfying feeling given that this is exactly the emotion this game is trying to convey, and it was doing it beautifully. This feeling kept growing as the game went on, to the point where the ending shocked me in the most appropriate of ways. I think the fact that I enjoyed this whole story in virtual reality added a lot to my experience. Not only did I get to notice more detail in the game's amazingly crafted world, but I also felt more of a connection to the characters. The fact that I was in this character's shoes the entire time likely is what made the ending so goddamn shocking to me, as if I had completely forgotten all the spoilers I subjected myself to before even ever playing. Even Lewis's story, which was painful due to the technical issues with VorpX and Cheat Engine, had a huge impact on me. I was left with my jaw hanging open, both affected by the story and wondering how much work had gone into making this masterpiece. What Remains of Edith Finch is most definitely my favorite game in this category, and it will leave a long-lasting mark. I doubt we're ever going to see another title do storytelling this well. Time for What Remains of Edith Finch's V-score. The V-score is a rating created to evaluate how well a game runs in virtual reality using VorpX. The rating is on a scale of 100 and is based on 8 criteria along with a penalty value if necessary. The first category of 4 criteria are the requirements. These are high-value elements required to provide an authentic VR experience. Acceptable 3D method. Having an acceptable 3D reconstruction method is worth 30 points because no 3D means no depth perception and then means no VR. Next, proper geometry 3D brings a game to life by providing the only authentic stereoscopic 3D method, so 10 points for that. What Remains of Edith Finch works in beautiful, realistic geometry 3D, so I'm obviously tossing a 30 and a 10 here. Next, proper head tracking, which is important. Unreliable tracking can destroy a VR experience, is worth 15 points in total. This isn't direct VR head tracking, but even with the sometimes erratic frame rate, I haven't had any problems with it. I'm going to award the game its full 15 points. VR requires games running with sufficient field of view, and because of the various ways we can achieve this, some more effective and some less, this is worth up to 15 points. Thanks to Cheat Engine and the kind individuals at Widescreen Gaming Forums, we have a pretty effective way of forcing the field of view we need. Full score for the field of view. The second category of 4 criteria is the features. This covers desirable features with games running on VorpX regarding graphics and rendering. With third-party VR, it's hard to come by proper shadows and graphics effects across the board. Dynamic shadows often cause issues, and some effects might render incorrectly. A game can gain up to 10 points based on this aspect. We have a few problems with What Remains of Edith Finch. First, the dynamic shadows display wrong and are disabled in our VorpX settings. Second, the aliasing is really intense, and even though we're doing everything we can to contain it, it's still not perfect. Last, the game's performance isn't too hot, even though we tried to contain that too. 7 out of 10 for this criteria. Proper 3D hands and weapon models are very hard to find in third-party VR. It's quite rare, but it does get a game up to 5 points for getting it right. Now, it's not like our character needs to hold weapons in front of the camera, but when you do see the hands, like for example when Edith brings up the key, everything is perfect. You'll even find that looking straight down, you'll see a near-perfect body model of Edith, probably better than I've seen in some first-party VR games. 5 out of 5 for this criteria. A proper user interface and heads-up display means being able to see your health, ammo count, and such. It also means being able to navigate menus. Up to 5 points for how a game handles a heads-up display. I'm giving the game a 4 over here because for the most part you won't need the UI very often. There's no heads-up display and EdgePeek does great when it comes to seeing the whole family book. Direct VR bonus. Direct VR makes the process of setting up a game much easier and often delivers perfect head tracking. Based on how a game supports it, it can get up to 10 points in bonus. Direct VR is basically non-existent with this game, so we're going to leave a 0 in this criteria and move on. Finally, outside of our 2 scoring categories, we have the good old penalty criteria. The penalty criteria is here to offset a game's score due to glitches or major issues. Up to 10 points can be withdrawn. This is where I have to slam the game a bit hard. I cannot ignore the glaring problem that is in Lewis's scene, along with a few other problems like the forced camera motion, the blasted field of view in some scenes, and other little strange problems here and there. I'll be dropping a fairly large penalty here, 9 points off the total score given the severity of the issues. What Remains of Edith Finch gets a V-score of 77. It's not the best we've ever seen, but it does stay within the range of other custom manual VR setups we've demonstrated in the past. What Remains of Edith Finch is most definitely worth your time in VR, and I find that score represents that adequately without overshooting your expectations. That's it for this VorpX guide, one that I didn't even expect to make until very recently. I hope it's going to be useful to you. When I first saw this title working in full VR, I felt like I had to share it with everyone given it was such a rich experience. Keep in mind, if you need a quick reference for this game's setup, you can download my instructions PDF in the description below. I'm already planning the next setup guide, this time covering a game that's been very recently released. Hope to share more on that soon. Sorry that the frequency of these guides has been pretty much dead lately. I do also still have, for example, Outlast 2 on my backlog, a game that I plan on getting to in not too long. Until next time, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.